All right, diving in today. And honestly, this is a topic that's just so close to home for, well, I think pretty much everyone. We're going to be looking at how parental conflict, arguments, disagreements, separation, divorce, all that, how it affects kids. And to help us unpack all of this, we're turning to this book, Emotional Empathy by the Modern Women's Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those areas where understanding, like really getting it, can make a huge difference. It doesn't matter if you're a parent dealing with these things firsthand, or maybe you're helping take care of a child, or you're a teacher, or really just anyone who cares about kids, right? Being able to see these situations through a child's eyes, that's so important.
100%. So our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to pull out those core, really essential insights from this book, Emotional Empathy, and try to give everyone listening a clearer view of what kids go through during these tough times. And hopefully along the way, we can offer some really practical advice for navigating those tricky, sensitive family situations.
What I found really fascinating about this book is that it's so grounded in real-life experiences. They use a ton of case studies from social work, and it really brings to life how these high-pressure family interactions, they affect kids of all ages, from babies to teenagers.
And it's not just about observing what happens. They've also brought in experts, consulting psychologists, lawyers who specialize in family issues. So it's a really multifaceted view and gives us a much more complete understanding of all the dynamics at play in these situations. Totally. So at its heart, emotional empathy is trying to do two main things. First, help parents avoid, sometimes unintentionally, putting their kids in these super difficult triangular relationships. Those often pop up during family conflicts. And second, to actually give kids themselves the tools to understand their parents' behavior a little better. That kind of understanding can really help reduce those feelings of self-blame and confusion that a lot of kids experience in these situations.
And another really useful thing the book does is shed light on those common parent-child situations that, sadly, sometimes end up in the legal system. It also introduces some really fundamental family and parenting concepts that are relevant to anyone dealing with these complex issues.
I really appreciate how the book is organized. It's super thoughtful, and that makes the information so much easier to digest. It's broken down into 4 stages, each tied to a specific age range. So they've got infancy, which they define as 0 to 3 years old, preschool, 3 to 6 years old, school age, covering 6 to 12, and then adolescence, from 12 to 18. And what I love is that within each stage, they go into these real-life case studies. And it's not just like a dry retelling of events. They actually dive into what the children are feeling alongside the struggles that the adults are dealing with.
Right, and each stage goes beyond just the stories and includes expert advice. So it's not just presenting problems, but also offering real practical solutions and potential paths forward for the situations described in the case studies. And then, to top it off, there are even prompts for self-reflection, which encourage readers to really think about their own actions and perspectives. I think that's a really important part of it.
It is. And ultimately, the book's overall goal is incredibly positive and hopeful. It's all about helping kids and families that are going through tough times find their way back to a happy, healthy childhood. And it also wants to give adults the knowledge and skills they need for positive parenting, both as a way to prevent problems and to respond effectively when those problems inevitably do crop up.
And the book has garnered some pretty impressive endorsements from people who really know their stuff in this field, professionals on the front lines. That definitely adds to its credibility and shows how valuable it is. It's been praised by a counseling psychologist, someone with a doctorate, and also by a really well-respected child and women's protection lawyer, as well as the director of the Taiwan Children and Youth Rights and Welfare Association. All of them talk about how practical the book is and how it offers this unique perspective on family dynamics.
One of the ideas from the book that really stuck with me was the concept of modern Meng Mu Stunkan. It's essentially the modern take on the story of Mencius's mother moving 3 times. Can you explain that a bit?
So it's really interesting how they've linked this to the historical story of Mencius's mother, who famously moved house several times to find the best environment for her son to grow and learn in. But this modern interpretation says that while the external environment is still important, these days, it's the immediate family environment that's absolutely key for a child's healthy development, both emotionally and psychologically. The book calls this the family mood. It's really all about the quality of those daily interactions and the emotional tone within the home.
That makes so much sense. It's about creating the stable and positive internal world for the child, no matter what's happening outside. And they also use kind of a powerful and actually a bit disturbing metaphor to describe how vulnerable kids can be during high conflict divorces.
Mm-hmm.
the ball child.
Yeah, that one really paints a picture, doesn't it? And it's not a pretty one. They explain how, in these situations, children can become like a rugby ball, fought over and pulled back and forth by their parents, each one trying to gain control. Or, and this is really sad, they might be treated like a dodgeball, something to be avoided, passed off to the other parent. And even worse, some kids end up being like a baseball, used to vent parental anger and frustration, sometimes even leading to abuse. And the book is really clear that being put in any of those roles has these profound, long-lasting negative effects on a child's development and well-being.
It's such a stark and powerful reminder of how vulnerable children are in these adult conflicts. The book proposes what it calls the 3 more friendly parenting principles to help shift these negative dynamics towards a more child-focused approach. What are those principles?
So these principles are meant to give parents a practical framework to work with when there's conflict. The first is more communication. This highlights the importance of open, honest, and respectful conversations between parents, especially when it comes to issues that affect their children. The second is more consultation, which basically means seeking advice and support from people you trust, whether that's family, friends, or professionals, when you're facing challenges. And then the third one is more consideration, which is about urging parents to always put their child's best interests first and really try to see things from the child's perspective when making decisions.
Those seem like really fundamental principles that could honestly make a huge difference if more parents put them into practice. Another big idea that jumped out at me from the book was the statement, parents need to be well for children to be well. What do you think is important about that idea?
Well, I think it really highlights how interconnected everything is within a family. The book emphasizes that a parent's well-being, their emotional state, their mental health, even their physical health, all of that directly affects their ability to create a stable, nurturing environment for their children. If a parent is struggling with their own issues, maybe they're stressed or depressed or dealing with that unresolved conflict, that inevitably spills over and affects how well they can understand and respond to their child's needs. It's like that thing they say on airplanes about putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others. You got to be okay yourself to truly help others.
It is that vital reminder that taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's actually essential to being a good parent. The book also uses this lovely analogy, contrasting the family as a haven as opposed to a storm.
Yes, and that's really the ideal scenario, right? For children to thrive, their family needs to be a safe space, a place where they feel secure, unconditionally supported, a refuge from all the challenges and uncertainty they face out in the world. When constant parental conflict creates a storm within the family, that completely undermines this crucial function and can be seriously damaging to a child's sense of security and overall well-being.
Building on that idea of the family as a safe haven, the book outlines some key principles to help parents minimize harm to their children when conflict just can't be avoided. What are some of those essential guidelines?
These guidelines are all about protecting children during really tough times. The book really stresses how important it is that children aren't deprived of the love and affection of either parent. They need those positive relationships with both their mother and father. Consistent, timely care is also essential, especially if a child is showing signs of distress. And it's so important to explain the reasons for arguments in a way that makes sense for the child's age without ever making them feel like it's their fault. And maybe most importantly, always try to see things from your child's point of view and consider their feelings in any decisions that affect their lives.
It all comes down to making your child's needs and emotional experience the priority, even when you're going through your own stuff as adults.
Yeah.
One of the more encouraging things I read in the book was about the perspectives of social workers who work with families in these difficult situations.
It is encouraging, right? I mean, they see some truly challenging, often heartbreaking situations day in and day out. But the social workers whose stories are shared in this book, they somehow manage to stay hopeful. They learn from these difficult family dynamics and apply those lessons to their own lives. They really emphasize that even after really bad conflict or a separation, positive outcomes and healing are absolutely possible for the families and, most importantly, for the kids.
It's such an important message, and it's a message of hope. All right, so let's really get into the meat of the book now. Let's dive deep into some of the key takeaways, and we'll do it stage by stage, looking at those case studies that illustrate these points. We'll start with infancy, that period from birth to 3 years old, which is so critical for a child's developing sense of security in the world.
You're right, it's a foundational time. And as the book points out, babies are incredibly sensitive to their environment, especially sounds. They can't differentiate between different types of conversations, so raised voices, any loud noises, those can be really unsettling for a baby and trigger anxiety. Consistent, responsive caregiving during this phase is essential for building secure attachment, that fundamental belief that their needs will be met and that they are safe.
And the book uses some really interesting case studies to illustrate this point. The first one is titled, Whose Turn to Care? Can you walk us through that one?
Sure. This case really shows the kind of conflict that can arise when there's an imbalance in childcare responsibilities, especially at night when everyone's tired. We meet a baby named Leth who's often woken up not just by things like traffic noise, but also by his parents arguing about whose turn it is to take care of him. The mom, Tiswan, feels overwhelmed, like she's doing most of the caregiving on top of working. And the dad, Koye, feels like his need for uninterrupted sleep after a long day isn't being considered. As they argue, baby Les starts crying even louder, but neither parent goes to comfort him right away. It's only when the grandmother steps in that things calm down. And what's really striking is how much a baby, even though they don't understand words, can pick up on and react to that parental tension. It really highlights how deeply connected family members are emotionally, even from those very first months.
It shows how even those seemingly minor disagreements, like who changes the diaper or who gets up with the baby at night, can actually have a big impact on an infant's sense of security. What are the big takeaways from this particular case?
Well, it really emphasizes how crucial shared responsibility is when it comes to childcare. Open and honest communication about each parent's needs, including the need for sleep, is also super important. And it shows how valuable support systems can be, whether that's grandparents, other family members, or even friends, anyone who can help out and prevent those feelings of burnout and resentment that can lead to conflict. Baby Lee's distress is a clear sign that parental tension directly translates into infant anxiety, and babies need a quick, comforting response when they're upset.
The next case study shifts focus to those sometimes tricky relationships between different generations, and it's called My Child, My Rules. What's the conflict in this one?
This one dives into those tensions that can pop up between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law, especially when it comes to differences in opinion on how to care for a baby. We see the grandmother, who has more traditional views on childcare, constantly criticizing the mother, Wang Qin's, methods of feeding her baby, Wen. It makes Wang Qin feel undermined and frustrated. And even though Wang Qin tries to establish her own style of parenting, the grandmother insists on feeding Wen according to her own beliefs. It even leads to a big argument at the dinner table, which of course scares the baby. This kind of intergenerational conflict can create a really tense and unsettling environment for a little one.
That clash between generations, those well-meaning but often challenging opinions on how to raise a child, it's something that plays out in so many cultures. What are the key things we can learn from this case?
It really shows how important it is for parents to set and stick to consistent standards for their child. That consistency creates predictability and stability, which is so important for a baby. And while some flexibility across different environments, like between the grandparents' house and the parents' house, might be necessary, the core approach to parenting should be as unified as possible. This case also shows how hard it can be to deal with well-intentioned but intrusive advice from relatives. It's important for parents to present a united front in their parenting decisions to avoid confusing or upsetting their child.
The third case, watching adults go from arguing to fighting, is unfortunately a much more serious example of the impact of conflict on a young child. Tell me about what happens in this case.
This one is about the dangerous escalation of conflict in a blended family. We see a young child, Shishi, who is increasingly exposed to verbal and then physical violence between her mom, Zuhua, and her new partner, Wenhan. At first, the loud arguments scare her and make her cry. But as the violence becomes more frequent, she starts to withdraw, becoming less responsive. And then, tragically, it escalates to a point where Wenhan physically abuses Shishi when she cries out for her mom during a violent fight between the adults. This one is a really stark reminder that unchecked conflict between adults can have direct and sometimes horrific consequences for the kids in the home.
It's such a disturbing and heartbreaking example of how conflict that's not dealt with can lead to abuse and trauma. What are the essential things we need to take away from this case?
I think it emphasizes, in bold letters, how crucial it is to be incredibly careful before entering new romantic relationships when you have children. Open and honest communication with your kids about any major changes in your relationship is so important. Making sure they understand what's happening in a way that's appropriate for their age and reassuring. And above all else, it's a reminder that nothing is more important than a child's safety and well-being. Protecting them from harm always has to come before adult needs and desires. Always.
Absolutely. The next case, adults in debt, why hit me? Sheds light on another way adult struggles can impact an innocent baby. What's happening in this case?
This one is really hard to hear. It shows how severe financial stress and the intense conflict it causes between parents can tragically lead to the physical abuse of a baby. The parents in this case are dealing with a failing business and are constantly arguing about money. Their baby, Guagua, cries, which is completely normal for babies, it's how they communicate. But the father, in his stressed out state, misinterprets this as misbehavior and lashes out. It leads to some really terrible abuse, shaking the baby, throwing him on the bed, even burning him with a cigarette and covering his face with a pillow. It's just devastating to read about how adult frustrations and pressure can be misdirected toward a helpless baby.
It's horrifying. What are some of the crucial takeaways from this awful situation?
It really underscores the huge long-term impact trauma like this can have on a child's ability to trust, on their emotional and psychological development. It's a reminder that parents need healthy ways to cope with their own intense emotions, especially when they're under a lot of stress. And they need to reach out for help, for resources if they're struggling financially, instead of taking their anger and frustration out on their kids. The baby's crying, that's just a normal way for them to communicate. It should be met with care and comfort, never violence.
The fifth case focuses on those transitions kids go through after parents separate. It's called separation anxiety, leading to abandonment issues.
Yeah.
What's the main issue being explored here?
So this case looks at a young child, Chi-Chi, who gets really distressed and starts acting out during handovers to her dad for visitation after her parents' divorce. The bad blood and ongoing conflict between her parents are fueling Chi-Chi's anxiety and making her feel like she's being tossed back and forth between them without anyone really caring about how she feels. The father is constantly bad-mouthing the mother, and the mother tends to leave quickly after dropping Chi-Chi off, which makes those feelings of instability and abandonment even worse. You can just feel how much the little girl is struggling.
It sounds like the parents' lack of cooperation and their negativity towards each other are really taking a toll on Chi-Chi. What's the biggest takeaway here?
It really shows how vital it is for parents to try to maintain a positive and cooperative relationship when they're co-parenting, especially during those transitions and handovers. Minimizing conflict and making sure the process is smooth, predictable, and reassuring for the child can really help reduce those feelings of anxiety, insecurity, and abandonment. The focus needs to be on what the child needs emotionally as they adjust to these big changes.
The final case study in the infancy section looks at what can happen when one parent remarries. It's called After One Parent Remarries. What sort of dynamics are we dealing with here?
This case shows those subtle but really harmful ways a child's loyalty and love can be manipulated when the custodial parent badmouths the non-custodial parent. So here, the mom, Wenhui, is visiting her young daughter, Shan Shan, after the dad, Shun Min, has remarried. And Wenhui notices Shan Shan is acting cold and distant towards her. It becomes clear that Chun Min has been putting Wenhui down in front of Shan Shan, trying to make her look bad, which creates this fear in Wenhui that she's losing her daughter's love. It causes a real rift in their relationship.
That's parental alienation, which is sadly so common, where one parent tries to damage the child's relationship with the other parent. What should parents learn from this case?
I think it highlights the profound and lasting harm that parental alienation can have on a child. Every child deserves to have loving relationships with both parents. It's so crucial that children are allowed to love both their mom and dad freely, without feeling pressured to choose sides or buy into one parent's negative opinions about the other. Kids thrive when they can maintain healthy connections with both sides of their family.
Let's move on now to the preschool stage, which covers kids between 3 and 6 years old. The book emphasizes that when adults argue and lose control, it can be a really negative learning experience for young kids.
Yeah, at this age, kids are very much in that egocentric thinking stage. Now, that doesn't mean they're being selfish. It just means that, developmentally, they see the world mostly from their own point of view and have a hard time understanding other people's perspectives. Because of this, they often think they are the reason their parents are fighting. Witnessing verbal abuse or violence during these years can be really damaging. They can internalize those negative behaviors and have trouble forming healthy relationships later on because they've learned unhealthy ways to interact. It's like they're being taught the wrong lessons about how to relate to others.
The first case in this section is like father, like son, cursing included. What does this one teach us about how preschoolers learn?
This one is pretty striking. It shows how much young kids learn by watching and imitating what their caregivers do, even if it's bad behavior. We see a young boy, Yu, who starts copying his father, Xiaolu, who uses a lot of abusive, aggressive language towards his mom, Chia, when they fight. What's worrying is that Yu starts using those same words, insults and curse words with his classmates at preschool. That's the direct impact of verbal aggression at home. It spills out into the child's interactions with others.
There's a big wake-up call that kids are always watching and listening to how we communicate, even when we think they're not paying attention. The next case, blaming oneself for parental separation, goes deeper into that tendency for self-blame we see in preschoolers.
This case is about a little girl named Xiang, who is convinced that she caused her parents to separate and that her mom has become emotionally distant because of her. Her dad has just moved out, and her mom is understandably distracted and withdrawn. Xiang asks this heartbreaking question about whether her being good will bring her dad back. It's a classic example of preschoolers blaming themselves for big family problems. And it shows how important it is for parents to be clear, to use simple language and reassure their kids that they're not to blame.
It's just heartbreaking how easily little kids take on those adult burdens and internalize those feelings of blame. The next case, avoiding making children choose sides, deals with one of the most damaging things parents can do during a conflict.
Yeah, this one is rough. In this case, a father, in the middle of a fight with the child's mom, actually tells his young son, Xiaowo, to choose which parent he wants to live with if they split up. Can you imagine the pressure that puts on a little kid? It's so unfair and emotionally damaging to force a child to choose between the two people they love and depend on most. Parents really need to protect their kids from these adult decisions and never, ever put them in that position of having to pick sides.
That kind of pressure, that forced choice, can be really damaging and have lasting consequences. Expecting visitation but being rejected is the next case, and it looks at the pain of broken promises and dashed expectations for kids.
So this one shows us a young girl, Man, who is confused and feels abandoned when her mom, who she was supposed to visit, doesn't show up. The mom, Xiaoche, was scheduled to see Man, but the dad, Xiaohao, prevents it, probably due to their ongoing conflict and maybe some parental alienation on his part. Man thinks that if she's a good girl, her mom will come back. It really shows how children think at this age, and it highlights how detrimental it is to interfere with a child's relationship with either parent. That kind of disruption can really damage their sense of security and well-being.
It's a confusing and hurtful situation for the child, being stuck in the middle of the parent's animosity and having to deal with that disappointment. The case study, Trying to Please One Parent to Protect Oneself, reveals a coping mechanism that some preschoolers develop in these high-conflict families.
In this case, we meet Lin, a little girl who starts saying negative things about her dad during the divorce process. It seems like she's doing this to side with her mom and what she thinks her mom wants to hear. It shows how children, even at this age, learn to please one parent to avoid jeopardizing their relationship with them. It's all about feeling secure and stable, even if it means suppressing their true feelings. It's a survival tactic in a really stressful situation.
It's sad, right? They're protecting themselves, but it comes at a cost. The last case study in the preschool section, Regression as a Warning Sign, looks at how young kids often signal distress through changes in their behavior.
Yeah, so this one shows us a little boy, Shangwen, who was always very outgoing and confident. But after his mom suddenly leaves, he starts showing signs of regression, like bedwetting and becoming more withdrawn. And to make matters worse, his dad, in a moment of anger, tells Shangwen, "Your mom doesn't want us anymore." This case really highlights how regression in young kids, going back to behaviors from an earlier stage, can be a sign that they're really struggling emotionally. Parents need to see these changes in behavior as a cry for help and respond with honesty, with explanations that are appropriate for the child's age and with lots of love and support.
These case studies from the preschool years really highlight how sensitive kids are to parental conflict and how they often misinterpret what's happening, blaming themselves and showing their inner turmoil through changes in their behavior. Let's shift now to the school-age years, ages 6 to 12. The book says that while family is still super important during these years, peer relationships become more and more important, and kids start looking for approval and a sense of belonging outside of their immediate family.
Exactly. As kids start school and their social circles grow, friendships and interactions with peers become a much bigger deal. If their emotional needs aren't being met at home, especially if there's a lot of conflict between their parents, they're more likely to seek validation and acceptance from their friends and other people outside the family.
The first case in this section is, when can we go on a family trip? What does this simple question tell us about what a school-age child wants and how they see things?
This case is about a child who feels responsible for the conflict that erupts when a planned family vacation gets canceled because the father is working too much. The kid was really looking forward to this trip. Family time is important to them. They overhear their parents arguing about the dad always putting work before family time. It shows how much children value those shared experiences and highlights the different perspectives parents can have on balancing work and family life. Open communication and shared family goals are so crucial.
It's a balancing act so many families struggle with, and even kids this age pick up on the stress and tension. The next case, the dilemma of dual-income childcare, focuses on the challenges faced by working families.
In this one, we have a child who wishes they were old enough to take their younger sibling to school by themselves. It's their way of trying to solve the problem that's causing so much conflict between their parents, who are constantly arguing about childcare. Both parents work, so finding and affording good childcare is a huge stressor for them, and the older child feels like a burden, like they're the cause of the problem. This case really shines a light on those childcare struggles that so many families with two working parents face. And it shows how kids can feel responsible for their parents' arguments even when it's not their fault at all. It also brings up those generational differences in opinion about parenting roles and responsibilities.
It's a reminder that children are so perceptive. They pick up on their parents' struggles and often feel a sense of responsibility that's way beyond their years. The real reason for stealing to buy things is the next case. What's happening here?
This one is about a child who feels really lonely and neglected because their parents are both busy working. They end up stealing money from home so they can buy their classmates' friendship and attention at school. They're not stealing because they want material things. They're stealing because they're desperate for connection and belonging. Tragically, the parents are so caught up in their work that they don't see what their child is going through emotionally. And when they don't understand why their child is stealing, it just creates more distance and alienation.
It's so sad to see how unmet emotional needs at home can lead to those kinds of problematic behaviors. The child is just trying to find connection somewhere, anywhere. The case study with a younger sibling, Does Uncle Not Love Me Anymore?, looks at some of the complex emotions that come up in blended families.
This case is about a child in a blended family who starts feeling like their stepfather doesn't love them anymore after a new baby is born. The stepfather was very loving and attentive at first, but after the baby arrives, the attention shifts, and the older child feels jealous, replaced, and resentful. This case really highlights the challenges of blending families and those sensitive feelings of jealousy that can emerge when children feel like a step-parent favors one child over another.
Step-parents need to be aware of those potential feelings of displacement and work hard to build loving and supportive relationships with all the children in the family. Parents separated, siblings apart is the final case study in this section. What's this one about?
This one focuses on those super strong bonds between siblings that are sometimes overlooked. The case is about a child whose biggest worry after their parents separate isn't the conflict itself, but being away from their younger sibling. They constantly ask about going home and being with their brother or sister. It's not just about missing their sibling, it's about losing their familiar home environment and routines. This case underscores the deep attachment between siblings and how difficult those separations can be. Parents need to recognize how important those bonds are and really try to meet their children's emotional needs during these transitions.
These cases from the school-age years really show us that even though kids this age are branching out and their worlds expanding beyond the family, what happens at home still matters so much, and it affects them in ways adults might not always recognize.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into emotional empathy, I think it's a good time to sum up some of the key insights we've uncovered.
It's clear from all the case studies across all the different ages that parental conflict and separation have a huge and lasting impact on kids. We see how children, especially the younger ones, tend to blame themselves for adult disagreements and family problems. It's just their natural way of trying to make sense of things.
Right. And we've also seen how sensitive they are to any changes in the family dynamic, even small ones, like changes in their parents' moods, how they communicate, their daily routines. Those disruptions, even if they seem minor, can be a big source of stress for kids.
And we've talked about all the different ways kids cope with parental conflict and separation. Younger kids might regress and start bedwetting or sucking their thumb. School-aged kids might look for validation from their peers or withdraw emotionally as a way to protect themselves from the pain and uncertainty.
So, knowing all this, what are some of the practical things our listeners can do, whether they're dealing with these challenges themselves or maybe know someone who is?
First and foremost, make communication a priority. Talk openly, honestly, and respectfully with your co-parent or partner. Even when you disagree or clash, try to do it in a way that puts your child's needs first.
And really pay attention to the words you use and the overall tone of your home. Kids, no matter how old they are constantly absorbing the emotional environment around them. That environment shapes their sense of security and well-being.
Make sure you're validating your children's feelings. Let them know it's okay to feel whatever they're feeling. And explain things to them in a way they can understand, especially during times of conflict or change.
And whatever you do, don't put your kids in the middle of your arguments. Never force them to choose sides between their parents. That is so damaging and can have lasting consequences.
Be on the lookout for any signs of regression or sudden changes in behavior. Those can be red flags that your child is struggling emotionally and needs your help.
Don't try to go it alone. Reach out for support. Talk to family, friends, or professionals like therapists, counselors, or support groups. There's no shame in asking for help.
And remember that even after a separation or divorce, your kids need both their parents in their lives. Do whatever you can, as long as it's safe, to facilitate a healthy, respectful, co-parenting relationship.
If you're a step-parent, be really aware of how your stepchildren might be feeling. They could be dealing with feelings of displacement, jealousy, or insecurity. Make a real effort to build strong relationships with all the children in your family and make sure everyone feels loved and supported.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into family relationships and how much our childhood experiences shape us, I want to leave you with a question to think about. What's one small but meaningful change you can make, starting today, to create a more supportive, stable, and loving environment for the children in your life? Think about how nurturing a positive family mood, as this book calls it, can have a ripple effect. It not only helps the kids you care about thrive, but also helps build a more compassionate and resilient future for everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.